Yeah, we can go ahead and kick things off. So yeah, welcome everybody. Thanks for coming to this Connect and Learn session on the Aquaculture Information Exchange. My name's Joe. If we haven't met, I'm the manager of the exchange. And we are the online home for the American aquaculture community. And we're excited to have Tony Chen from Manolin today to talk about aquaculture data intelligence. These Connect and Learn sessions are an opportunity for our members to share their expertise on a variety of aquaculture topics. And you can check out our past ones. I'll drop the YouTube link in the channel. We have a YouTube channel where we upload all of these after they're presented. And yeah, if you're interested in presenting one yourself, please reach out to me. We have some exciting ones coming up later this year, including we're working on putting together some panels on some exciting topics in aquaculture. But with that, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and I can relay them to Tony. Um, but yeah, with that, take it away, Tony.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you for having me, Joe. I'm excited to share kind of our story, our company. But yeah, I mean, one thing that I'll start off with is I don't have that much content, maybe 20 minutes or so. So happy to field questions, happy to have this as a conversation, after that, or even if you have questions during the presentation. It's not a huge group here, so we should be able to move. I'd love to keep it open and keep the conversations going essentially. But yeah, happy to be here, happy to share the work that we do. My name is Tony Chen and I'm the CEO of a company called Manolin. Our focus is really on providing data intelligence towards the aquaculture industry, and today I'll talk on a couple different things, but pretty simply what I want you to get out of this conversation: who am I, what do we do, what do we think about data intelligence, why do we think it matters for the industry, what makes us as a company super excited about the future of aquaculture, and then what can be done to make this industry better. And for me, this is really a cool moment to present a little bit of our narrative. So we primarily as a company work with the salmon industry right now. My co-founder and half our team sits in Norway. But our journey actually started from exactly where Joe is currently working. So in the Chesapeake Bay, working with oyster farmers. So we have a real connection to the US aquaculture scene. I'm currently sitting in Denver, Colorado. Even though our company has moved a little bit away from it, we do envision coming back. So really excited to share our story. So introducing, who are we? Manolin is a company that was founded back in 2018 by myself and my co-founder, John. Our backgrounds, we're both computer scientists. We met as random Craigslist roommates, as a matter of fact, up in DC. I have a computer science degree from MIT. John has the same from Rowan University. We met as random roommates. We would just hang out and eat seafood, play golf, and really stumbled into aquaculture, as a matter of fact. But both working for the government. He was at the Department of Defense. I was working under the FDA DOT as part of a consulting company. But both of us were basically building big data systems for the US government. But our journey led us towards aquaculture, and how it really got started. And some of you guys may recognize what this image is, but this is an inventory system at an oyster farm. So for us, we ended up in the Chesapeake Bay and met oyster farmers and just thought the industry was the coolest thing. Loved what was happening on the water, loved eating oysters, loved learning more about those operations. For me personally, I'd always grown up kind of as a water person. I swam competitively, always fished my entire life, but never really saw an industry in the ocean until we stumbled across oyster farmers. So this was back in roughly 2015, 2016, that oyster farmers that we spoke to told us, yeah, we have an inventory problem. We don't know where our oysters die. We don't know why these oysters die. And we think data may be able to help solve some of these. So for us as two kind of young 20-year-olds, working in the software industry, we felt like we could help. So that's exactly what we started with, was turning this board into a digital application that could help track the inventory for oyster farmers. That developed over a couple years and kind of weekend projects, beers on the water, sitting with the farmers. Really, we ended up with a pretty cool application that managed oyster inventory. This was back in 2016. But from that, I think what we saw was not necessarily just the problems with oysters and what you see in US aquaculture, but we saw bigger challenges at the global aquaculture level. For us, we've been working with machine learning, data analytics, big data for, the better part of our professional careers. Is what we studied in school. We saw the opportunity to apply that into a much larger ocean space. And it was more than just oysters. It was the entire aquaculture world. We felt like many of the challenges that we had begun reading about, whether you're talking shrimp farming, salmon farming, really all the areas that people are trying to grow fish, there was some challenges. And as we started to explore a lot of these different industries, what we learned was a lot of it really came down to animal health. Animal health was the key piece that really tied the profitability of a farm with the growth of the industry, with kind of the overall efficiency of agriculture, of protein production. It really came down to fish health. And we were told to go take a look at salmon farming. At the time, people were, even in the Chesapeake Bay, even the oyster farmers said, these salmon farmers, they got all the money in the world. They got huge systems. It's really a completely different world, and you guys should go and check it out. And that's exactly what we did. But what we found out was the way that the way that salmon farmers were managing fish health, it was still a very manual process. You can imagine, in the Chesapeake Bay, whether it's spreadsheets or whiteboards or pen and paper, everyone's trying to assess where my stock is, where our problem's going to come up. And you saw the same thing with salmon farmers in Norway. They were just dealing with a lot more data. For example, a lot of the process was still manual. You saw the same spreadsheets, the same PowerPoints, all going towards action plans, and all of it powered by a ton of data that's being collected across the industry. In salmon, for example, there's cameras underneath the water. These farms have sensors that are constantly online collecting data every second and every minute. There's PCR data where labs are sending reports back. What we saw as kind of engineers was just a ton of structured data. And that was one of the big keys. Was when we first spoke with oyster farmers, they said, we don't know why our oysters die. And we said, great, show us some data. But there really wasn't any data to analyze. There was nothing in a structured way that we could send to a computer to start number crunching. And that's really been the key for us, is trying to find structured data at scale. And that's what we saw in the salmon industry. Yes, they're a much more mature industry that's been around for many years and has scaled to a level of industrialization that no other aquaculture system currently has. But the benefit of that is a ton of data. And we saw it in just sitting in data silos. And as a couple kids from the government sector, we had a lot of experience working with bad data and different data silos. So we felt like we could help. And that's really where the focus of our company is. As I switch a little bit into what we do today, we have two platforms. So two what we call data intelligence platforms, Watershed and Harpoon. And they sit on both sides of the industry. One is for farmers and one is for suppliers. And what we work on is providing intelligence to both sides. One of the things that we've recognized from kind of day one is for aquaculture to grow, there's still a lot of foundational science and a lot of collaboration that needs to take place. What you see in aquaculture is very different than perhaps what you see in agriculture, where it's gotten so competitive that people don't want to share data. People don't have common problems that they're working on together because of the size of the industry. That's not necessarily the case in aquaculture. And even at the scale of salmon, it's still not necessarily that competitive when we're talking about trying to solve fish health problems. So we really sit in the middle. We provide a series of services to farmers, and we provide a lot of those same services towards suppliers. And in the next few slides, I'll go through exactly what that means. So for farmers, what is data intelligence? How do we help farmers make better decisions? Well, we have a dashboard like most other software companies, but our focus is really, again, on helping to make earlier decisions. We've always known that in the water, things can change at a moment's notice. Having days, hours, notifications ahead of time can really help you solve problems and make smarter decisions. When you're losing fish and oysters at a scale where it's multiple percentage points a day on a bad day, there's things that you can do that can help save those particular animals. So our services and our dashboard gives farmers heads up, whether that's from area notifications. So one of the things has always been, when it comes to aquaculture, your neighbors matter probably more than anything else. You need to pay attention of what's going on at neighboring farms, because those pathogens, those diseases will move through the water column. We have no way of quarantining anything. So we provide intelligence on your surrounding area, as well as providing high-end machine learning epidemiological models and risk models on when outbreaks are going to happen. So we monitor things like fish stress, ocean conditions, anything that may impact the future outlook on your farm. And we try to provide that as quick as we can towards our farmers. That's the farmer side. For the supplier side in our Harpoon platform, it's really about product intelligence. I don't know how many times I've been told by whether it's farmers or suppliers, we sell products, we sell fish feed, we sell medications, we sell genetics, but we have no idea how those products are performing out in the field. It's one thing for products to perform in a lab. It's one thing for it to perform in small controlled studies. It's another thing to understand how they work when you're out in the open ocean. And that's one of the things that we try to aim to support with our Harpoon platform. So helping suppliers understand how their product is doing live out there in the field, both to drive new product development as well as provide better customer service. One of the big thesis that I have in my head is, when it comes to aquaculture, there's just a whole lot of questions that we don't know. This industry is so new. When you look at salmon farming, we've selectively bred 15 generations of fish. We really are not that far along in our scientific discovery. So every piece of data that can help support those new discoveries and answer new questions is extremely, extremely critical. So that's our Harpoon platform, a brief overview over the two pieces that we work on. And as far as kind of the power of our data set, one of the things that we see is we have one of the largest data sets in the entire world when it comes to salmon data. We go back many, many years, and we have many different companies. So as of right now, we operate almost like a large salmon business as far as how much data we see, and the differences in products and different combinations of solutions in different situations that we see. So the power comes from our network of farms. We represent over 20% of all of Norway currently, as far as data that gets constantly fed into our system. And this gives us a huge piece of it. We call it kind of a data gold mine, as far as being able to find patterns within the information that comes across our systems. And as far as a few of those kind of outputs, I did want to share a couple cool stories and kind of use cases of how our applications have helped customers across the world. And again, we support both the suppliers and the farmers. So there's a whole list of different ways that our data intelligence can be applied in different scenarios. For farmers, it's simple things like understanding when outbreaks are going to happen. It's about bringing data together. One of the things that I think you see in a lot of enterprise industries, people collect data without necessarily the idea of analyzing it in the future. A lot of this data gets collected, whether it's for invoicing systems or traceability. It's not necessarily used to answer questions. So the fact that you can put all the data you've collected historically to answer questions is extremely valuable for a lot of customers. Another example is the work that we have done with Veramaris, who is an algae feed supplier. Their factory is actually based here in the US in Nebraska. But what they've been attempting to do is make a fish oil alternative using algae oil instead of using fish oil, really trying to improve the aquaculture feed supply chain. And as part of that, they sponsored research with us to identify exactly how much EPA and DHA, or fish oil, is necessary to get commercial benefit for the farmers. Another really cool thing that we have been working on is some product intelligence with Merck. For them, they have a solution of different sea lice treatments. Sea lice is one of the biggest parasites that salmon farmers in Norway have to deal with. And to be honest, they've never really understood how their product performs out in the field. We've run some analysis and studies for them, and as a result, they've been able to target the usage of these products in a much better way. And the way that we're able to do this, I've touched on it a little bit. We don't actually generate any data by ourselves. So we pick up data from different pieces. Back when we started with oysters, we were getting farmers to collect their first pieces of data, the first structured information across an entire site. In Norway, again, we saw that that wasn't necessary. We could tap into existing data sets and instead just weave them into one large data piece that we could run analysis on. So that's largely how we end up working. Is right now we plug into different, get the necessary data to answer more and more advanced questions. And this is the video. I will show you, I will play it and then kind of just voice over it a little bit. It will be available. This is a little bit of a sneak peek for you guys. This will be available on our website soon. We haven't published it, so this is the first time we've actually shown it to a group of people. But it really talks about some of the complexities of what's happening at a fish farm. One of the things that we are launching is the ability to trace populations of fish as a farm goes through its operations. And one of the big challenges here is, if you can imagine, and this is a problem we actually saw with oyster farmers way back many, many years ago, where a lot of sorting events and merging events would take place, where you're trying to get uniform quality, uniform sizes together. When you do these activities, however, you're breaking a chain of traceable data. Essentially, you're mixing fish together. They end up in different sizes. They can end up with different histories. In a way, it's really a patient health record. A group of fish can have a very different patient health record. And so far in the industry, no one's been able to really track these individual fish, we call them populations, down to a very granular level. So this is something that we have been working on in order to, again, go back to a couple of things I've mentioned on product efficacy, being able to forecast properly. The more granular we can get into a cage and what that distribution looks like, whether 50% of the fish come from one genetic family and another 50% from another genetic family, being able to answer questions about these specific populations is incredibly important. And one of the things you guys have probably noticed is when it comes to Norway and salmon, you've probably seen there's a lot of US-based companies that have been producing cameras that are using machine vision to understand what's happening under a cage. One of the things that some of these companies have promoted is the ability to be able to see individual fish and be able to tag individual fish. Our perspective is we need to be tagging and monitoring groups at a level where a farmer can actually make a decision on. So for example, it's great that you can name every single fish in a cage, but are you really going to go into a cage of 100,000 fish and go find Joe? I don't think so. I don't think you're going to go in there and pull Joe out of the water if he needs a treatment. We need to be operating at the level that a farm can actually change at. And that's one of the things that we have been launching with our population tracing. Go on to the next slide here. And as we shift into kind of the last pieces and what gets us, super optimistic about aquaculture in the future, this graphic is almost 15 years old, but this is some of the first things. I'm sure everybody on this call has seen this. From our perspective and the journey of our business, we started with oysters. We saw the potential for aquaculture and we saw the necessity for it to grow globally. So that's really been a mission for us, since I think we're one of the few companies that has worked in multiple different aquaculture markets. We understand what's happening in the Chesapeake and what's happening at the state level when it comes to US-based aquaculture, but we've also had the advantage of seeing what's happening at the large scale of salmon aquaculture in a country like Norway, where it's their second largest export. But for us, the vision's always been the same. We don't see the world growing without aquaculture being a part of that. And we're on a mission to try to make that growth happen as best as possible. And that's something that we constantly think about. That was one of the reasons that we felt like we needed to leave the US, is that this growth in the US just seemed capped in the current situation. And it's because of a lot of different reasons, but the industry in the US, I'm sure you guys all agree, just isn't growing at the pace or isn't scaling as fast as it should. We believe that aquaculture is a piece of the puzzle for future food production, and we're trying to do everything we can to be a part of that. And one of the things that, what I think the industry can do, moving forward for us, it's always been a kind of a data. We see everything from a data perspective, and we see the value in what data can provide across the industry. This graphic is one I've shown a lot, and it's a little bit of a theoretical concept, but in our minds, aquaculture succeeds when these three players play very well together. You need government to set right regulation. You need government to set licenses and to set a growth pattern for the industry. And the industry has to respond by producing animals and running their farms efficiently. You also need a ton of foundational research that can fund new developments and new science in the industry. We're missing all three of these pieces in order for the industry to grow very well. And in our point of view, data is the best way for these parties to communicate together. Again, my co-founder and I worked many years on behalf of the government. We saw where a lot of these data systems can break down and how the government operates, and we don't personally see enough of data flowing between these three parties when it comes to aquaculture. That's where we focus primarily on industry and the research side, but we're well aware that the data that we're generating and what we talk about is really important for all three of these pieces. And an example that we were very proud of, that we were able to see ourselves as a proof point for. One of the things that happens in Norway is sea lice is one of the biggest regulators across the country. Sea lice is what dictates the growth of the industry. It's what dictates what farmers are deciding to do every single week. And it's a very big topic of the political sphere. One of the things that we saw in the news recently was an analysis that we did on behalf of the industry had made its way into government politician hands. And one of the things that they're doing is there's a system, a traffic light system in Norway, but it can, based on sea lice values, it can reduce or increase the amount of biomass you have at a farm. When you're talking about salmon businesses, we're talking about millions of dollars being taken off the table because of sea lice values, is essentially what's happening. It's been really cool to see our analysis make its way into politicians' hands and for them to actually bring it to Congress, essentially, to push back decision-making and policy, because we're seeing data points that make sense for the industry. In this particular case, what's happened is you're seeing regulation where farmers have responded to the regulation, made a ton of improvements, but the resulting outcome is still not to the level that the government originally dictated. So now there is a little bit of a pause as to where should we go next. But for us, I mean, for our farmers, this is great. They're going to be able to grow a little bit better. But from our standpoint, this is really, really valuable as far as having truth and being able to get conversations around what we're actually seeing happen out in the field. I'm sure, that's one of the things that we always heard in the US was getting politicians' times, whether it's walk the hill events or being able to get regulators to actually look at the problem. In Norway, it's slightly different, where the industry is so big, all the politicians are looking at the problem. But in some of these other markets, it'd be great to be able to get people's times. And that's where we believe data is a big key. And with that, I mean, that's pretty much everything I wanted to talk about as far as our story. Again, our company is Manolin. You can find us online in a lot of different places. Another thing that we do is we do a data intelligence podcast where we talk about various topics across the industry. Yeah, and with that, I'll open up to questions. Happy to answer anything and have a conversation here.
Thanks, Tony. Yeah, that was great. Yeah, I heard about you first through the podcast. That's what inspired me to reach out to you. Yeah, that was great. Brought up a lot of good topics. I know I was just speaking to some people yesterday about talking about how farmers uh, often have to spend too much of their time advocating for themselves with politicians. Um, and so, yeah, it's great to hear how y'all are using data to help them tell their story. And we hope with the Aquaculture Information Exchange to do the same thing, whether it be putting information on a web page, a public web page, that people could point politicians to rather than having to answer the same questions over and over. Um, or whatever we can do to help, we want to do that. I'm gonna drop an exit survey in the chat if people want to fill that out during the Q&A. please do. It just helps us improve these sessions. But yeah, we can open it up to questions. If you want to raise your hand or drop a question in the chat, and I can relay it that way. Okay, looks like Chuck has a question. Chuck, yeah, you can just type it in there. Oh, Marcy, I think I saw your hand first. Go ahead. And I see you, Robert, next.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. I'll lower my hand here. Thanks, Tony, for the presentation. Really interesting work. I just wanted to, it's not a question so much as a comment. I appreciated you mentioned the intersection of government research and industry. I wanted to, I guess this is a plug for our office. So I'm a science coordinator with the NOAA Fisheries Office of Aquaculture, and I am part of the science branch within that office. And so this is exactly what we work on. And I see too, there are others from our team, both within the office and the broader aquaculture program on this call. So I just wanted to put in a plug. This is what we do every day, right? We look to connect industry, research, and government, right? We think about how do we use the best available science in policy and regulation and management? How do we leverage data? I love you're talking about leveraging data. How do we leverage data to make better decisions? To get data to industry, get data from industry. So all of those connections. So rest assured, there are folks who work in government who think about these things and realize it's very important. There's always more to do, of course. But it was a really great point you made. So I really appreciate that. And just rest assured, there are folks in government who recognize the importance of those connections, and we're working on it to connect with industry and our researchers and management and try to keep those conversations moving ahead. So thanks for highlighting that. And I appreciate the talk. Thank you.
No, absolutely. I mean, if I can respond a little bit or like
Sure.
I'm not critiquing the US industry. I think one of the things that we've always seen is when you look at the NOAA budgets, I mean, we've spoken with the folks at NOAA. It's just not high enough up on the list of how budgets are set and where you see growth. I mean, for us as a business, it was really tough in a way. I mean, we were in DC, and there is no aquaculture hub in the US. There is nothing like Bergen, Norway in the world where you're talking about major corporations within walking distance. For us coming in as outsiders, trying to just get a foothold in the industry, we could either drive, the Chesapeake and go hours at a time between farmers and different events, or we could show up at Norway and walk next door to all these large salmon producers and people that have been there for 50 years. And that's where I want to see US aquaculture grow, and I would definitely love the work you guys are doing. From us as a business, we've had to move according to where a lot of these signals are and where there's opportunity for us. I mean, and in a way, I think it's as simple as we've always wanted to apply AI and data intelligence into the industry. And it just became a very simple equation where it was, we needed to be in salmon. There's more data here. If we want to do everything that all these tech companies are doing, we got to have the data set. And that just didn't exist anywhere else in the world. But yeah, no, thanks for the comment.
Nice. And Robert, if you want to go next, and then Chuck, I'll call on you after.
Hey, thanks. That was a great talk. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Oh, right on. Yeah, I'm also with NOAA, and I'm in the National Centers for Environmental Information, which is part of the National Environmental Satellite Data and Information System, NESDIS. And so my interest is in two things. One, I guess this whole relationship between private industry, you like a data, I guess a data analysis platform provider from the private sector and government all together in this sort of not just regulatory, but also in a kind of symbiotic relationship in this idea that you're saying you have epidemiological models. I'm assuming some of those are driven by nationally produced products and services, either government-based, some may be private. But then I was thinking on the other end of that, are there data streams coming out of your platform that are going into regulatory environments in the government?
Not yet. That's always been in the vision. I mean, we built a lot of those systems in the government side that plug into these types of places. We could definitely see that becoming kind of a future. And we do make our models available to various companies. Not everybody wants to see our dashboard. Some of these large salmon companies have their own systems. We don't currently, but that is a vision kind of for the future. We know how important it is to be able to move this information effectively. And you are correct. We do pull in a lot of data from public data sources, NOAA data sources, when you're looking at oceanographic data. That is all things that go into ours as well. But that's definitely something that's on the future roadmap. I think one of the things when you talk about working with government, and I see I may have hit a little bit of a hot topic from what I mentioned, but one of the things that we've always recognized is when you look at research in aquaculture, there's one thing about publishing papers, but when you're publishing a paper, they take a lot of time to write and they take a lot of time to produce. You see funded studies that take 4 years to complete when you're talking about a fish disease. If you look into those papers, there's typically 2 to 3 years of data collection that is a part of that publishing. And we felt like you could change this entire model where if we just constantly had that data ready to go, you could publish papers every other week. We can ask questions to our system in a way that moves this whole process faster. So it's not just about government needing to make decisions quicker, but there's a way where when data is structured, regulators can look at it and set regulations that make sense or even adjust regulations moving forward based on new data that's coming in. And researchers can also discover new things in a much faster way. But that's where we felt like the whole system is moving slow, where yes, regulators are looking at research. It takes a couple of years to make a decision. Then if they make a regulation, it's hard to make regulatory changes. And that's just not it's not fast enough for what's necessary in aquaculture. We are at a point where we need to figure out how to breed these animals. We need to figure out how to feed these animals. We need to know how to protect these farmers and their businesses in a much faster way. And that's where we see data kind of being collected. But to your question, yeah, those data streams can be available. I see somewhat related question in the chat on business models. For us, it is kind of subscription services. So farmers pay an annual fee for our platform. Suppliers can fund studies through us. And we're pretty clear. Like, we are not an academic institution. We are not professional researchers. So as a result, we have biases in how we do and conduct our studies. They are funded by a lot of the industry, but still, this is something that we see as necessary. But our business model is typically kind of SaaS subscription funded studies. And then I'll follow up with the other question that Ian just asked about, reflections on getting industry and farmer data. For us, it's been about being boots on the ground. I mean, that was one of the things that we know is data privacy is a big concern. So being able to protect it is extremely, extremely important. And we are very clear on what we use the data for. We tell farmers, hey, sometimes they join our studies without having to pay any sort of price. And we tell them, you're paying with data. We're taking this data, we're going to turn it into models, we're going to turn it into decision-making, and this is going to come back towards you. And we're very open that, yes, this data is being pooled together from everyone. And as a result, it has been challenging with some of the larger publicly traded companies to come on board with us. But as I mentioned, at different points in my talk, it is one thing that we've always recognized is that, again, the industry has to group together more in aquaculture than we've seen in agriculture. And as a result, that's a way that, yeah, we have to share in order to answer these is a lot of the conversation that we have.
Nice. And Chuck, you want to go ahead, and then I see you, Julie.
Yeah, I have maybe a quick question. I'm not sure. We're farming a high protein dulse seaweed on land in aquaculture tanks currently. And we're pulling seawater out of the ocean and circulating them. We have 2 farms in Oregon, a 10-tank farm in Bandon and a 20-tank farm in Garibaldi. We're announcing later this month a 600-tank equivalent in Newport. And we're in the market for obviously people that are similar to you in the sense of we're going to be capitalizing it with sensors and technology for every individual tank. And I was just curious whether that was something that you guys, I think it's simpler than fish, but it's the we're going to be extracting proteins and doing stuff like that. I was just curious whether that was something in your wheelhouse that you guys were interested in, because we're building it. I didn't want to reinvent the wheel, I guess.
No, I mean, it's definitely something we would love to chat more on. We've always had the vision of being able to support multiple species, multiple different geographies. Obviously, things like sea bass and shrimp are a little bit closer into where our systems fit in, but that's something we could definitely talk about. I'm really curious to hear more about the operation. Really cool.
Thanks, Chuck. Yeah, go ahead, Julie.
Thanks so much, Tony. This is a really interesting presentation. I'm curious. So I work for NOAA also, but on the research side, and I've worked a lot with shellfish. And so I had, I think, a two-part question for you. So the first part is, were there particular aspects of oyster farms that were data poor when you were working the Chesapeake Bay, that there are, say, sensors or other automated technology that's come online since then that would help you from a business analytics perspective? So that's like part one. And then part two is coming at this question from the government side, but on the research government side, the government does also, in addition to regulating, fund a lot of research. And so are there sensors that you think could address some of these data poor areas that could benefit from research funding to develop, if you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. On your first question, at the time that we were there, the data poor. So one of the things that we struggled with was oyster farmers would tell us red tide is an issue that we deal with. Algae blooms is something we deal with. Great, that's predictable. We could probably figure out and give you a warning. What are you going to do about it? That's what the oyster farmers were interested in it, but they couldn't bring their cages up. You can't really, harvest the entire farm. They're just, even if you had that early warning, what can you do was one of the challenges. At the time, we did attempt to, we plugged into the Virginia NOAA sensors, the 10 that are in the Chesapeake Bay that were available at the time, and could pull a lot of those water quality metrics. Since then, it's obviously gotten a lot cheaper to deploy a lot of these drones, a lot of these sensors. At the time, the oyster farmers would tell us, we don't have $10,000 to put a sensor, a kilometer away from the farm. It just didn't make sense. It's very different nowadays, but still, I think the problem of what you can do with it still matters, and how much you can predict. When it comes to sensors and stuff that I think can make a difference, I actually don't think that's the biggest gap. So one of the things is we have been working, or I've been trying to understand a lot of the lobbyists in Norway and people that are talking on behalf of the science organizations that are trying to influence politicians and influence regulation. I personally believe that a lot of the analysis that are getting done is way too advanced. And I may be dumbing it down way too much. Again, I'm just a computer guy. I don't know much about how politics works, but my understanding, and when I showed the screen of the politician that referenced our stuff, the difference that we did was try to make it as simple as possible. So, and trying to get to something that everyone can understand. We feel like a lot of times politicians are way too busy to be able to analyze a research paper. They're smart enough to be able to understand all these complex models, but they need very simple narratives to be able to get constituents together to vote on a particular topic and to have the confidence behind it. So from that standpoint, like when we look at NOAA data, NOAA's got the best oceanographic data of any public organization in the entire world. A lot of this stuff is here. Whenever we have farmers that ask us, can you predict X, Y, and Z? Can you use satellite imagery to predict chlorophyll? It's yes. The answer is yes to all of these questions, but where it makes an impact is somewhat down the road when you particularly talk about regulators. That's our personal opinion. We've come from outside the industry. I've had to dumb everything down so that I understand how fish work, let alone how the ocean works. And that's part of our viewpoint into it. But as far to give you an answer on what sensors matter, we do believe that it is really interesting to look at these farms as sensor stations. So being able to deploy sensors at farms, at these locations, this is probably a deeper data set that you could ever, like every single Norway farm is a sensor station. You have cameras, you have minute by minute temperature, salinity, oxygen. That is more than what most government organizations could ever deploy. That's been some of the thinking that we've had. Is we have a data set right now across the coastline that can rival a lot of what government systems have when you're talking about sensors, because the farmers have to pay for it essentially. But that's where I do think of being able to support farmers with more of these things are super, super valuable, even as you bubble it up to public sector and NOAA data.
Nice. Thank you, Julie.
Thanks.
Yeah, I actually had a question sort of related, and we sort of touched on this, Tony, when we first talked, but it's sort of, from your experience starting in the Chesapeake Bay and then now being focused on Norway, and I'm more curious about sort of the culture of the aquaculture community, both here in the U.S. and in Norway. And, like one of the things that we've seen with the aquaculture information exchange is that a lot of our users are completely new to aquaculture. And there's sort of like a big interest in, wanting to know how they can get involved. And that's sort of one of the things that we're trying to focus on is making it as easy as possible for them to do that. And that's essentially takes wrangling a lot of resources that are already available online and putting it in a way that makes it easy for them to access. But I'm just curious, now that you've sort of seen both of these different communities, if you think there's anything that the U.S. aquaculture community could learn from that cultural angle that you see in Norway.
It's a really good question. I'm not sure there's that many differences in the way that I see culture. Like I think one of the really cool things that we've seen is, and I mean, most people in the industry see it, where if you're a fish farmer, no matter where you are in the world, it's somewhat the same person. The same folks that are growing oysters are the same ones growing shrimp in Southeast Asia. They're the same ones that started the salmon farms in Norway. It was just 50 years ago. I think the big difference has been, if we look at the scale and size and growth of the industry, it does seem to be more of a regulatory difference where Norway kind of put a lot of efforts behind scaling up the industry. And for many years, they did it without, we made a lot of mistakes in a sense of scaling very, very quickly. But that is one of the things. I think when you talk about culturally, the people in the industry are all, I find, no matter where you are in the world, they're still very excited about the potential of aquaculture. And that's people working on a farm in Norway to the guys working on the oyster farms in the Chesapeake. I think there is, I'm not sure it's so much a cultural difference, but a cultural change of talking more about, not being shy of the scale and industrialization of the industry. I think there's a lot of people, whenever I was scared to talk about my view of how aquaculture can save the world or how big and it should grow, because I felt like that wasn't the right thing to say in a lot of times. And I do feel like in the US, there's probably a little bit more of a focus on small scale aquaculture, kind of scientific research and breakthroughs. And I can say with confidence that I don't think necessarily that leads you to a path to scale, especially when you, as I've understood how these industries grow, how they respond in different regions of the world. If you're not having that scale perspective in mind, it's never going to be a top of the topic of conversation. Essentially, there's going to be other countries that are willing for, that need the money that will scale the industry. And my point of view has always been, it's going to scale. There's no way to stop it. We need to make it as best and as sustainable as possible. But having that means having that conversation. I think in Norway, people understand there's plenty of political discord. There's plenty of people that don't support the industry. It's not everybody loves salmon farming, but they're having a conversation about it at scale. Whereas in the US, we're nowhere near that right now. It's a hobby to not to not to kind of belittle the industry, but when you look at volumes and you look at revenue and you look at what's going on, it's a lot of small holders. And that's one of the big cultural changes, is being able to talk about it like a business at scale, because I do believe that's what the future of aquaculture is going to look like.
Thank you. Yeah, it's insightful. And anybody else have a question? We've got about 10 minutes left for questions.
I think Robert still got his hand up.
Robert, did you have another question?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to have my hand up. I'll go and lower it. I'm in this mobile. I've never used Zoom on mobile, so I didn't know where any of the controls were. But
No problem.
No worries.
My only other question, or I have a ton of questions, but one question I wanted to ask you was, are there any open data standards across different farms? And I guess in the entire nation of Norway, is there a data standard emerging for kind of using as an integration platform? I'm assuming you guys have your own data model that you've now developed to integrate all of this data, but like, are there open data standards emerging?
There are. I don't know if you want to call them open data standards, but for example, they have been standardizing fish transfers and movements between cages, as well as mortality reasons. There's been a couple of different projects. You have to pay to get access to those standards, but it's just a couple $100. There have been standards. There has been talk on data flow. I will give you my perspective on that, and it comes from working with a lot of data standards, particularly at the government level. It is that I don't believe spending efforts on data standards and specifically, I don't think it moves us fast enough. Again, is one of those big issues. We deal with APIs, we deal with structured data whenever it's possible. We love open data standards, RESTful APIs, stuff in kind of what you see in the general tech space. But we do believe that setting standards over how you collect data, how you send things between systems can actually slow things down, simply because those standards require approval. They take a lot of time. And then the whole industry changes. So for example, when you're talking about mortality reasons, it's obviously very good if the entire industry is all recording gill health the same way, or wounds or deformities. It's great for that, but that doesn't apply us to utilize the data set in the past. Which means, everything that a farmer collected previously, we're constantly thinking about that historical data, how to get the most value out of that. And they don't always fit into new data standards. A lot of data standards that are being developed take 2 years to get to approval, then they get launched, then the farmer's starting to collect data at day one now, 2 years from now on that data set. So for us, we prefer to let the companies, or we can move very quickly to change up these. But as far as kind of specific data standards, we do find them actually slowing down a lot of the purposes that they're set for. But if you're just talking about data sending between different places, that is actually one of the things that I also think the governments can help a ton with. One of the things when I was working at the DOT and some of these other agencies was, there's so much effort spent on building dashboards and building data sets. I would really prefer just an API, and to be able to work with the data, make the data available, set the standards, and then let us play with it, let us work with it. And, not every single agency needs to have a full dashboard of how to analyze data. It's not necessarily government's role in many cases. Again, a little long-winded, I apologize.
Here for APIs. Anybody else have any questions? All right, if there's no more questions, I think we'll go ahead and end it there. But yeah, thanks a lot, Tony. This was great. Yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways, a lot of different conversations that, are going to sprout out from this. So look forward to seeing people talk about it on the exchange and elsewhere. But yeah, thanks everybody for coming, and we will see you on the exchange.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Joe.
Appreciate it.
Have a good one.